Hello, Professor Ansari.
Do you want me to start now?
Yes, I want.
Okay.
Did you hear the presentations or?
I did just about.
Excellent.
But
Okay.
So I've got some ideas, and I thought I would just make some comments on the presentations, but also some thoughts. I don't know how long. About 10 minutes. Is that all right?
10-15 minutes is fine. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Very good. Very good to see you again.
You too. Thank you.
Yeah,
it's been a long time. Thanks.
And I just very much regret that I'm not there with you guys, but c'est la vie. Things are very busy these days, and I look forward to reading all the papers in due course. I was just first of all, I should say I very much enjoyed both the papers. Insofar as I sort of picked up, clearly a lot of them were sort of summarised and some of the main points. I mean, I've come across obviously the work of Tagoe a bit, and I very much agreed with the critique that was being put forward. I mean, one of the issues that we have in any study of nationalism, of course, is studying nationalism from within the ideology, so to speak. So Tagoe himself, I do wonder. I'm not familiar enough with his own writings, but listening to what people have said and things that I've read on about his work is to what extent he's almost self-aware of the fact that clearly he's writing from within a nationalist frame of reference, and he's promoting a certain ideology that he's also trying to sort of critique. And one wonders, whether in his own writing, as I think was outlined rather well, how far he understands the methodological issues that he's dealing with here. I also, I was very struck by the fact that he obviously considers his work to be extremely unique, which is a matter of some debate, obviously. I mean, I think, there are distinctions to be made, obviously, between identity, ideas of identity and nationalism as we would find it in national consciousness. And I'd be curious to know to what extent he's basically developed that sort of distinction. But obviously, notions of Iran Shah are quite widespread within the intellectual framework and intellectual history of Iranians. Whether they understood it in that term is another matter. But clearly, when you have a political society, if you will, and one needs to define what we mean by that, but a political society that draws a lot of its understanding of its own identity from myths and legends and other ideas that are derived from books like the Shahnameh, but I mean, obviously it's wider than that. Clearly, there is a concept of Iran that exists that is being promoted, certainly within a particular bureaucratic or intellectual class. But how widely that's absorbed, is difficult to assess because clearly there is some sort of repetition or some sort of idea that's promoted. But again, the question is how we understand people who absorb that and what we understand by notions of national consciousness. I'm very struck, for instance, that, one of the things I look at and I've worked at, as Comrade knows, 19th century thinkers, and also, one of the more striking things has been, for instance, the claims that the Iranians made at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. If you look at those claims that the statesmen make in 1919, which are largely dismissed, of course, they draw a very interesting parallel with the notion of Iran Shah. Their assessments of where they feel they should be, the territory they should reclaim, extends, as the British noted quite rightly, all the way, from the Oxus to the Caucasus, much of eastern Anatolia. But interestingly enough, not actually the Shia sites in southern Iraq. I mean, they weren't particularly interested in taking control of that. But they had this sort of vision of an Iran, a greater Iran, which they thought was their natural right. And of course, nationalism always sort of pretends that it's natural, it's eternal, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I do think is highly problematic with any sort of study of, and it's not something unique to Iran, to be honest, is the amount of studies of Iranian history that are done through the prism of a nationalist lens. And I think it colours that. It colours it very badly. It's seen as legitimate. So people do it. You can get away with it. I mean, it's very interesting that someone like Tagoe could work in Iran promoting these ideas. Of course, they're acceptable in a sense to the regime because they promote a certain nationalist vision of the country, which they can deal with, even though they don't necessarily, in terms of regime ideology, accept it. On the second paper, again, I was very intrigued to hear, and I'm sort of somewhat disappointed, I have to say, at Rouchani's attitudes, although not entirely surprised. But I find it very interesting, again, that you get this idea among a number of intellectuals And again, I use the term broadly there, but I mean, let's say a number of intellectuals who promote ultimately, what is what could be best described as authoritarian liberalism, if I can put it that way. And it's an interesting juxtaposition, I think, as our last speaker said so well. I mean, the attitude of some of these thinkers towards the protests, for instance, is very, very striking. I mean, it emphasizes one aspect of Iranian nationalism, which has always struck me in terms of the intellectual exercise, and that is that Iranian nationalism in some ways exists as an abstract that doesn't actually include the people within it. I mean, it's sort of an abstract idea that people become very besotted with. But as I wrote in an article a long time ago, it's like Iranian nationalism without the Iranians. I mean, it's the Iranians are constantly getting in the way of what people understand to be the sort of pure idea of Iranian nationalism. And I find that, again, a sort of a problematic, an interesting case of, what it represents about the development of the state even in Iran in the 20th century, which is very state-bound. I mean, it's the state does quite well under the Pahlavis in a sense, but society doesn't. I mean, we don't balance the development of the state with the development of sort of social rights, civil rights, and others. And that's in some ways reflected by this thinking, which I find very interesting. I mean, again, I hope I got the name right. Was it Morteza? What was the name of the chap? Manadiha, I think. So, again, what he's basically promoting is that, from what I understood, was essentially a sort of a monarchical vision of, sort of like an enlightened despotism of some sort. Again, I mean, what's interesting about these is the way in which they're sort of revisiting old ideas, repackaging them. Again, it's fascinating to see. I'm never one who feels that we should dismiss these things, because I think it's fascinating to sort of discuss, to understand what people are thinking now. But it's also a reminder, to my mind, of how still, in some ways, the discussion on nationalism within Iran and outside Iran, to be honest, has become. We still haven't really moved beyond some of the ideas that were developed in the early 20th century. And as someone, I know Kamran will hate me for saying this, but as someone who's a big supporter, a big interest in people like Furuhi and Takizadeh and others, I do think that some of them will probably be lamenting what the state of nationalist thought is in contemporary Iran, that it hasn't really progressed maybe as far as they would like. I see Kamran has come up to the top, so I'm going to stop there.
You still have time if you want to go.
It's fine. I mean, I just was thinking of my notes, because I did take a lot of notes, and I'm just sort of trying to see if there's anything else that I really wanted. There's Iran without the Iranians. Oh yeah, there's one other thing that I suppose I would perhaps maybe just throw into the mix, and that is that the sort of one of the ideas of thinkers on nationalism, which I find quite interesting in applying to Iran, if people is the idea that Anthony Smith developed on lateral and demotic nationalism. Or lateral and demonic sort of identities. And I think we've got to distinguish between the identities and the nationalism, by the way. I think nationalism is very much a modern phenomenon. But I think that's quite an interesting means of explaining, in some ways, how identities of Iran persisted over the ages. Again, distinctive from nationalism. But this is a very lateral phenomenon, quite thin, quite elitist, not necessarily something that penetrates through society. Although I'd have to say that obviously the whole corpus of mythologies, as developed in the various quote histories and mythologies, clearly had an impact. I mean, it clearly does have an impact, and it does maintain a certain sense of distinctiveness. But again, that's different, and I think we have to be careful and different about the sort of exceptionalism that people like Tabatabai put out. It's interesting. I mean, I was curious to see, how our speaker today would approach Tabatabai's thought, and I'm reassuringly persuaded by his argument, if I can put it that way. I mean, in the sense that I was always a bit of a skeptic as far as Tabatabai is concerned, and I think that here we have someone who is is interesting, is worth having a look at, but I think in terms of intellectual rigor is in some areas quite seriously flawed. I'll leave that there. As I said, I've only really been able to sort of listen to those two papers. but I very much hope that I will be able to see all the papers in due course. I'll talk to Shahram and see if I can get a preview at some stage. And thank you very much for listening. And again, sorry I can't be there.
No. Thank you so much, Ali. It was a fantastic set of comments, and I was pleasantly surprised by the degree of convergence between our ideas, which is, I think, great foundation for keeping the union in the United Kingdom between Scotland and England. So we'll see if there is any secession.
Absolutely, Carol. We'll be recruiting you up north soon.
Yeah, well, looking forward to it. Thank you so much. I mean, feel free to stay around, but if you have anything to attend to, also you can do that.
I will need to go because I need to catch a train, unfortunately, just away. But I'm going to hang around for a little bit, and I'll listen to some of your. Presumably, you have a discussion, so I'll quite.
We are very grateful for your time. Thank you so much. So we take questions now. Luckily, we have quite a bit of time. So I suggest we take questions.